Hello and welcome back. My name's Tom Hamp and I am your instructor for session number 2 of the Hospitality Training Institute of Michigan's Restaurant Finance 101. Thanks for joining us for the second of 2 lessons in this course. We'll get into more detail in this session. We'll cover such topics as cost control and food costs, purchasing, scheduling of your labor, among other things. So without any further delay, let's get started. Restaurant Financials 101, session number 2. Here's what we'll cover today. So we're going to talk about some cost control and food costs. We are going to talk about labor costs today and understanding that profitability. How to control those costs during purchasing, where it all starts. How to control those costs during receiving, when you actually get the product on your receiving dock. The inventory process, going to go a little bit more in depth with that today. And then calculating and pricing your inventory, going to touch on that a little bit, and then controlling costs during storage of your inventory, as well as taking stuff out of inventory, what we call issuing. In the next few slides, we're going to identify some cost control, identify prime costs, which we've talked about, identify and calculate some food costs, identify factors that affect food cost. So when you eventually get in charge, or maybe somebody you could already be in charge, that you're going to take control of this operations cost control process. You really have to understand it and know what it is to make sure that we're doing things properly in the organization. Certainly, the size and scope of your operation determine what level of direct operation and control that you will have, and then understanding all the costs associated with running your business. And then last but not least, cost control. It's not a one-time thing. It's not, we take a look at it today and we're good to go for the next 3 months. That's not how it works. It's really a continuous process. You have to constantly be monitoring different facets of it, of the process, and we'll talk about each one of those facets today. So monitoring your costs, depending on your organization size, the management structure, those types of things, you may be asked to monitor your costs daily, hourly, or by minute. It may be necessary, but most of the time it's not minute by minute or hourly, maybe daily, weekly. But again, it depends on your own structure, your own processes, and your upper management. We've talked about prime costs, right? We know that it includes the total food costs, which we know as could be standalone, or it includes beverage costs. But here we have total food costs, beverage costs, as well as labor costs. Our prime costs are usually the highest as far as the cost goes, and we want to make sure that we need regular evaluation of those costs. Talking a little bit about labor costs, we want to make sure that we understand, right? Labor costs isn't just the wage that we pay. It includes the salaries and wages for sure, but it also has to take into account payroll taxes, benefits, and any other things that you get as compensation from your organization. Food cost control and food costs also takes into consideration any opportunities for loss, such as waste, theft, spoilage, or poor scheduling of our people. And then effective control requires understanding the formulas and the calculations. Now, just to make sure that we understand this is that you may want to know how to do it manually, but there's a lot of help. You have a lot of tools in your organization, software, point of sale systems, spreadsheets, whatever the case. You have a lot of tools that are already in place to help you with this, but it's always good to know how to figure out these formulas manually. Just a little review here. We know what the prime cost is, the formula. It's food cost, which includes beverages, and the labor cost. An example, real basic example here would be food cost. Your food cost is $3. Your labor cost is $2 for a total of $5, right? And then if you want to take that a step further, you can divide the prime cost by the target percentage that is given to you by upper management to set a selling price that ends up being on the menu. So remember, cost of sales includes food and beverage costs. Another new formula that we'll have to know is inventory. Really about the product cost. So the inventory, the beginning inventory plus any purchases minus the inventory, ending inventory equals our product cost. So we want to make sure that we know that. But again, our point of sale systems really help us with this. But again, knowing the formula would be advantageous to you. And then we really want to make sure that we know both the dollars and then being able to convert dollars to percentages so that we can compare time periods, whether they're the previous time period or the same time period a year ago. When we're calculating percentages, we get into food cost percentage, and that really is our food cost divided by our food sales. So an example would be if our food cost is $14,500, we divide that by our food sales, which at this point would be $50,000. So we get a 29% food cost percentage. This allows us to compare operations using percentages for that better insight compared, last time period, those types of things. Remember when we were going through the P&L last session, we talked a little bit about the cost of goods sold, right? These are our direct costs. So we know the cost of goods sold percentage formula is as follows. It's our food costs plus our beverage costs divided by our total sales. So that's what our expense is, our cost of goods sold or our direct expense. An example here would be if we had a food cost of a food and beverage cost of $18,000 and our total sales was 70, we divide 18 by 70 and we get 25.7 as a expense percentage or a cost of goods sold percentage. So we want to make sure that we're using the correct sales numbers for accurate calculations. When it comes to inventory, we want to make sure that we're monitoring inventory because again, we know that things can disappear, whether that's through spoilage, whether that's through theft, whether that's just through waste, whatever it is, we want to make sure that we're monitoring our inventory properly. We want to make sure that we also keep track of anything that comes up missing or that's a write-off for any shrinkage or waste that we have. Again, it might sound like it's a waste of time, but keeping track of shrinkage and waste will help the accountants, the financial people, understand better what your food costs are. So effective management reduces unnecessary costs, and that will help the bottom line for the whole organization. As we move into labor costs and understanding profitability, we're really trying to help you understand and identify and calculate labor costs, identify some of the factors that affect labor costs, and then identify how an operations cost and pricing affect profitability. So first and foremost, labor as a variable expense. So labor is a variable expense that fluctuates with sales, especially those that are on hourly wage. So we know that when we become busier during a lunchtime, dinner time, or breakfast time, that we need more staff in the operation. So again, we pay that hourly and we know that cost goes up the more people we have on staff that are currently working at the facility. Remember, hourly wages include that base pay, but it also includes any benefits for the employee. Now, an example would be something like this. If they get paid an 8-hour wage, but they also have a 25% benefit cost, then really 25% of 8 is $2. We add that on top of the $8 to get a $10 an hour. That's really the wage that we're going to use for our variable expense, not just the 8-hour, but the 10-hour. Your operation might be different. Maybe it's $9 an hour plus 30% benefit cost, which would certainly be more there. It'd be a third more, which would be $12 an hour. So these are obviously, you're not paying people $8 an hour unless, of course, it is the tip wage. So again, it just depends on your organization. One of the skills that you'll need to develop if you haven't already is projecting labor costs. Remember, you don't have to do this manually, but it's good to know if you had to do it manually, you could do it, but usually software applications point of sale systems help when we're trying to understand and project labor costs. We certainly want to project labor costs by position for each meal period. That means our servers, our busing, our chefs, and those that cook, and then as well as hosts and managers. So again, we want to make sure that we understand what our labor costs for each position, but also for each meal period. And then what are your operational standards that are handed down maybe by management, right? That certainly will affect any labor costs that we have. Any menu complexity takes longer. And then the mealtime duration. How long is a lunch period for your particular operation? And then estimate those hours and employees needed per position to make sure that the customer experience does not suffer because of it. What are some of the impacts of our labor costs? Well, labor is a major cost besides food, right? So we know that labor is involved in our prime costs, and we know that can be on the upwards of 65% or more. You just can't control the labor by lowering wages. That'd be nice if we could, but that's just not how it works. We need quality people. We need to pay them well. So again, making sure that we're assigning people during busy times and then not having as many staff during slower periods. And then there's industry information and data out there. So use the industry wage scales and adjust quickly to sales changes if there are any, so that we can, again, make sure that we're paying people appropriately, staffing appropriately, and really you have an effect on that bottom line profit. Fixed and variable costs. So we talked a little bit about variable costs being those wages. How about some of the fixed costs, right? And that would be the manager's salary. So typically a manager would be on site and they would be paid a salary, not hourly. So it didn't matter how many hours they work, they're going to be doing the same sort of things. We know that the variable costs are for our hourly employees, regardless of position. And then there's some situations where you get semi-variable costs, and that's the combination of both fixed and variable costs going forward. If we're going to look at the total labor cost calculation, as we spoke about before, not only does that include wages, but it also includes any type of unemployment, Social Security that is deducted from your checks that employers have to match, Medicare, workers' comp, and other benefits. So we absolutely need to know what those costs are. They typically can run, benefits costs range from 15 to 20% of base pay. So think about that when we're trying to, get that labor cost down. And so we want to make sure that we're monitoring and controlling all components of the labor cost. Profitability is tied to fixed and variable costs, right? When we have sales that go up because we're very busy, our expenses go up. It's just part of it. When we're not as busy, our sales go down, our expenses go down. But we can't maintain that for long. We need people to come and be our customers, order stuff from us, and make sure that we're serving food in a timely manner and then hitting our bottom line profit. So we know and talked about the prime cost is that food and labor costs should equal somewhere in the range 55 to 65%. If it gets much over that, that could be problematic. If it's under that, that's great, right? So usually it's great that you can really turn a pretty good wide swath of profit because of that. Everything's efficient going forward. And then control costs through contracts and monitoring schedules. Let's turn our attention to the actual beginning, and that's where purchasing comes into play. So we won't have any food in inventory if we don't have somebody purchasing food to put in inventory. So really what purchasing is that we need to really identify the importance of effective purchasing as it relates to cost control. And again, I know most of you aren't at this stage, or if you're kind of investigating hospitality, this ultimately would fall on management shoulders, a general manager, a purchasing person if you've got an organization that's big enough. But they have to know this stuff because what they do greatly affects the money and the financials. And we'll talk a little bit about what par levels are. And this is a great tool for people in purchasing so they know how much product to order and they don't overbuy or underbuy. And then identify how product yields affect purchase quantities. We know if a product yields a lot, we're not going to buy it as frequently, depending on the meals that we serve. So what are the first steps to cost control? We need to purchase the correct amount of ideal product at the best price available, right? We don't want to skimp on quality, but we want to buy the correct amount of the ideal product at the best price available. And that's where the buyers help control costs for the entire organization. So we have an idea of what things cost, especially if you've been in this position for a while. But we also have historical data, right? Historical sales data on, how much we've consumed, how much we went through over a certain period of time, because we either compare that to last week, last month, or we compare it to the same time period last year. So let's just say a Tuesday night in the middle of September, we can go back and go a week before, or we can go to last year, same type of thing. But you have to be somewhat careful because there's other factors that could affect that. But also buyers have to minimize their cost by controlling inventory and reducing the waste due to spoilage. We can't overbuy because something's going to sit on the shelf and ultimately it's going to get past its use by date. So the role of the buyers really, they monitor pricing and commodity features to save money, ensuring the quality products. So they have a big responsibility. So let's go in and explain a little bit what this PAR stock method is. PAR level means enough stock is on hand to last until the next order is delivered. So that's interesting. So it's useful for consistent business flow and static menus. We know that inventories aren't static. People are taking from the inventory all the time, and then we have orders coming in that we're adding to inventory. So it's not static, it's fluid. So we have to understand it, but we need tools to help us know what we have in inventory and then order the appropriate amount. And that is determining what your PAR level is. So first and foremost, determine time between deliveries. You probably have a vendor that's set up on, you probably have multiple vendors set up on a time delivery cadence. That means they come every 2 weeks, they come every week, just depends on your business and the types of products that you order. But you need to determine that time in between deliveries. Estimate the usage during that time. So let's just say that's a 2-week time period. What's the usage of this individual product over that time? Now I know you would be responsible for many products, but we're taking this as simplistic as we can. Let's just look at one product during this time. And then once we figured out what the time between deliveries and estimated usage during this time, we want to add a safety factor, because there's no way of knowing if we all of a sudden have a spike on a Tuesday night that we weren't expecting. So we want to put a little bit of a buffer there to make sure that we don't run out of a certain thing in our inventory. And then last but not least, we want to calculate the PAR by summing usage and the safety factor. So we have an example for you. So if we know whatever product that we have, we go through 9 cases per week, that's pretty standard. We've looked back in history, we've used 9 cases or around 9 cases per week for a long time. We've figured out a safety factor of 3 cases, and that gets us a PAR stock number of 12 cases. So at the best of times, we have 12 cases in stock. But we know if we have an inventory of 4 cases, we want to make sure that we get to that PAR stock. So what that means is that if we have 4 cases in stock, to get to that 12, we have to order 8 cases. Now, by the time the delivery comes here, we might be down again. But again, that's just the fluid part of inventory. So PAR sheets track the inventory showing current and desired levels for ordering. And again, these sheets could be electronic, they could be online, they could be on your point of sale system. It all could be integrated together. We know that there is certainly software. If your software is tied to your point of sale systems, and that can automate some inventory management, but requires regular updates and accuracy. And we'll talk about that in a few slides about making sure that we're keeping up with our manual inventories and counting to make sure everything's very accurate. We do want to take a second to talk about standardized recipes and the importance of standardized recipes. So standardized recipes are used to determine portion costs and directly impact menu item pricing, right? So if we're using menus that we have, created food costs or come up with food costs and food cost percentage from, and somebody goes and starts wheeling their own recipe, maybe they're using more of the proteins, maybe they're using less of the lettuce or the tomatoes or the mushrooms. Again, whatever happens, if they change one of our standardized recipes, it really affects our food costs because now we don't have the right measurements. So standardized recipes are really important. If a chef wants to go rogue and start creating stuff off the fly, that's gonna upset the apple cart. We're not gonna have accurate counts because we might be using something too fast or too slow. Everything we do is interconnected. So standardized recipes are important. And if we don't follow them, we may end up sacrificing some inventory, which in turn could upset guests because we can't make a certain item that we have on the menu. Shrinkage also impacts. So cooking and trimming reduces the volume and weight, so affecting the cost calculation. So we want to make sure that we are taking the measurements, the weight of something consistently. So whether it's got everything in before prepping or we weigh it after, we want to make sure that we're consistent. Let's move over to what happens when we receive the product. And this is the order put in. We have to wait, a handful of days, and now the deliveries come. And so we want to make sure at the end of this little module that you identify the processes for managing deliveries and then receiving goods. How is that done? We just don't start unloading it off the truck and putting it into storage. There's a method. We want to identify the methods of requesting and receiving credits, and that usually is when something goes wrong or something isn't shipped properly. Both, if somebody shorts us, we want to make sure that we notate, but also if somebody overships something. We want to understand the term cost of goods on hand and identify those factors that can contribute to it. So again, that's something to do with par stock, making sure we got the right things in the right place. So the delivery, we've ordered, the delivery arrives, now what? Well, we got to find a piece of paper called the PO or purchase order, and we want to match it up to the packing list that the driver probably has, right? So the PO is really all the document ordered items, the quantity and the price. Has it right on the purchase order. It's good idea and practice to keep a receiving log. Why? Because this maintains a hard copy or electronic copy to match invoices for quantity. So keep that receiving log so that we make sure that we're accurate. If somebody comes and checks us and says, hey, I think you've checked in the wrong things, you can pull up these receiving logs and kind of show them, hey, I understand where you're coming from, but these are the things that needed to be taken care of, and we put it on the log, and here it is. So we want to expect those goods right. If there's damage or if something is hot, needs shipped cold most often or hot, we want to make sure that those temperatures in that delivery truck has been maintained. So we need to ensure quality as well. Did we order the grade A or the grade AA? And make sure that that condition matches on the PO. We don't want to be charged for something that we didn't order. Maybe they did a substitute and unknowingly to them, that wasn't what we wanted in the first place. You want to check your quantity, right? So compare to both the invoice and the PO to identify the discrepancies. They should be the same. Match the prices. Check invoice prices against the PO. They should match because that's how we ordered it. And so we're going to use that cost and put it into our process and our system. And if we don't check that and it's not correct, then it messes up everything. How do we handle shortages? Oh boy, we need credit memos for that. Typically, try to get that credit memo before that vendor that delivery driver steps back out because we're checking things in appropriately and we were shorted. We don't want to let that go by the wayside because they owe us that for the payment that we're going to give them, right? So either handle shortages by using a credit memo for adjustments. That will probably be the most popular. And then sign the invoice after everything's done. If the delivery meets your satisfaction, then go ahead and sign the invoice and ensure all issues are resolved before signing, right? So keep that delivery vendor from leaving until you get everything checked in and that you're signed for things. Once that you've checked everything in, now we need to get into storage, right? So we want to prioritize that storage. We know those things that can spoil or that are perishable, they need to hit the coolers first. So it's dairy or meat or maybe even the freezer. We want to make sure we move on these first. And then what comes next is making sure that we secure the storage area, right? We don't want to make sure that we're putting, cooled meat, a meat that's just coming from a truck that had cooling device on it. So we want to make sure we're recording temperatures and corrective actions in a log. So we want to make sure that the refrigerator coolness is at 41 degrees or lower, okay? This second part here is really to make sure that your organization as a whole gets the information that they need to put in the software and make your job easier. So any copies that you get for the signed PO and invoice, send it to accounting. So they have it at their disposal. They can reconcile the numbers and it really helps out. You want to also establish delivery hours, right? You don't want vendors delivering product right in the middle of lunch because you're busy, your staff's busy. Who would have to take time? So negotiate that. Talk to your vendors and set up an appropriate delivery day when you know you're not going to be pulled away because everything's busy and we just can't get to checking in things properly. So negotiate and post schedules for efficient receiving. That would be great. When we are under delivered, so we've ordered say 10 of onions and we only get 7, the credit memos should be written to make sure that we take that into consideration because credit memos are kind of insurance, right? They're insurance that we are still going to either get paid or we're going to be reimbursed for what we didn't receive. So the supplier representative issues credit memos at delivery, right? So if you're right, Johnny on the spot to look at to receive the products and put it into inventory, make sure you're talking with the driver to let them know, and they most of the time should be able to issue a credit memo for the missing products. When you handle them, you want to make sure that you handle credit memos just like cash because that's essentially what it is, right? Want to route it securely to accounting. They know what to do with it. They see that something's short. They kind of give us a refund, and so they can continue their negotiations with the vendors out there. And then record keeping. You need to have good record keeping because again, a lot of paper here, depending on the size of your organization, it's paramount. Could be errors as well, so we want to maintain our records to prevent any payment errors, but it's also is a good backup. Let's move over to inventory management, right? We want to make sure we balance the inventory, so we don't want to overstock. That's why we use the PAR stock method. We know we have timing matters, right? So conduct inventory before large deliveries for accuracy, and then as we receive stuff, we want to make sure that we put the new stuff in the back and use the older inventory because again, we don't want anything to spoil. So this is where your management of inventory becomes key. And then you want to manage costs, right? Monitor high dollar and slow moving items carefully. Okay, because we know that it's a high dollar and we want to make sure that we're putting those in the right place. There's no damage so that we can turn that out and serve to the customer. Everybody's different. This inventory process may align with yours, it may not. But again, the overall thought here is to make sure that we impress upon you how important the process is, right? So the page before, sorry about that. Identify the correct methods of taking inventory and the various methods of inventory pricing. We won't touch on a lot of that stuff, but let's get into it. What is inventory? Really, it's itemized list of goods and products. They're on hand and the dollar value. That's all of inventory. Their on hand quantity, list of goods and services, and the dollar value of your inventory. It's certainly essential for supporting menu offerings. We've got to have stuff. If we don't have things in stock, you hate for your wait staff to go back to the table and say, we're all out of that. So again, trying to manage this is a huge undertaking, but you got help. You got those tools, software, point of sales to help in this process. So it's essential for supporting menu offerings and calculating food costs and turnover rates. And then your inventory value is an asset. There's a cost for the amount of inventory that you typically or on average carry in your warehouse or in your stock rooms. So again, it's an asset. It's listed on the profit and loss statement so that we know what it is. Two types of inventory, right? We can take it manually or physically. So physical inventory is actually, we go out and count one by one and then evaluation of the item. So we are doing an actual count and trying to come up with what the cost of this is. A perpetual inventory is really theoretical count based on received and issued goods. So we have a point of sale system and things are coming and going in that. We know that the longer something goes, that there's probably going to be errors in it. But as long as we're reconciling on an ongoing basis, we can get by this. So again, physical inventory, you're accounting them one by one in your stock room. Perpetual, we take that reading right off your technology devices. And then it's always good to compare actual versus perpetual inventory, make sure they match or that they're very, very, very close. Because again, that's part of the automation. The physical inventory, right? Consistency in record keeping ensures valid comparisons over time. That's the physical, going out and counting it one by one. Certainly verifies the inventory matches the expectation, so that's all good, and then helps control costs and reduce losses. Certainly, as I said before, all your software is probably tied to your point of sale system, certainly aids in inventory management, which certainly helps. And then perpetual inventory is cost effective for really large operations and multiple outlets. So we're talking chains and stuff like that. We want to make sure that you have got your arms around those costs so that we understand it better. And then compare actual and theoretical inventories to identify any changes or differences or variances. And then we want to make sure we're understanding that. If you do have a discrepancy or a variance in your inventory, what should we do? Well, we know the one that they're going to occur. It's not if, it's when. So variance occur due to waste, errors. Just key in errors. Whoops, instead of $29, that should have been $2,900. So it can just be keyed in wrong, or there's inaccurate bookkeeping altogether. So identify and correct issues to control costs and maintain profit. The way we have it set up here is that everything's on a spreadsheet, and then if something's out of whack, we can certainly identify that and make changes as we go. And then monitor and adjust inventory periodically, right? So again, keeping your arms around it, monitoring it on an ongoing basis. Some of the best practices that we have, again, depending on your organization, do you take it often, which is monthly or weekly? That's probably good. Categorize items consistently and use that uniform process. Count it the same way every time, starting from one end to the shelves to the other. Go around the room at the same place. And then make sure that you're assigning consistent personnel, maybe the same people, to inventory tasks for accuracy. Again, because somebody might be very good at it or been used to this area. And then sometimes you might want to change things up and let other staff members get some practice at it, that type of thing. But consistency will help accuracy. When we do conduct that physical inventory, we're using two people, right? One to count, one to record. And then maybe we counted a second time. So go back down the row, have the person that counted now recording, and vice versa. Start in one place, and then progress logically through the operation. That makes it the easiest, so we're not double counting or miscounting. And then include all the food and supplies, recount areas with large discrepancies. So we want to make sure things are matching, and if there is a large discrepancy, we're going to have to start over in that specific area. So these next few slides are going to help you identify the correct methods of taking inventory and the various methods of inventory pricing. Because we don't really know to the penny of what's in inventory, because people are putting stuff in inventory and taking stuff out on an ongoing basis. It's difficult to make sure that we have consistent pricing, so we want to make sure that we know the formulas so that we can get a really close estimate. So here's where we talk some of those things that are necessary to understand how important the inventory. So recording inventory shows stock quantities, but certainly not the price of what those quantities are. We could have bought something 2 weeks ago that was one price, and we bought something last week that's actually a higher price. So now how do we price that out? So again, we have different methods to do that. So inventory value is the key, is a key for the income statement, because it's an asset for you. So the formula is for inventory is opening inventory plus any purchases minus closing inventory. So we want to understand what that is, maybe at the beginning of the day, beginning of the week, and then what it is, add the purchases, and then what it is at the end of the day or the end of the week. Depends on your organization. So once we close inventory, right, it's very interesting. When closing inventory increases, cost of goods sold decreases. Something to think about there. And the other way is true as well. When closing inventory decreases, when you have less than we thought we did, cost of goods sold increases. Why? Because we're selling more. We're taking that food and beverages that are in the coolers, they're in inventory, and then we're doing what we do well, and that is feed the client. But that also means we've used inventory, but the cost also increases as well. So we know that, and I've talked a little bit about this before, is that inventory is fluid. It's not static. It doesn't stay the same for long. So identify the inventory issuing process, which means how do people come and get stuff out of inventory? Is it a formal process? Is it not a formal process? Is it software based? Is it paper based? So again, things to think about there. Certainly want to identify any methods to control inventory and shrinkage. Identify methods to control inventory shrinkage. So we would need to get our arms around that, because that will affect any food costs or food cost percentage. How to keep your inventory secure? Well, first and foremost, you want to make sure that, especially high cost items, that you give trusted employees keys only, and make it their responsibility for the storage area. So they could be monitoring it. Maybe, to get something in their storage area, you have to ask them either for the key or they have to unlock it for you. So again, trying to keep your arms around these types of things in your inventory is very important. And then follow that process that's in place for issuing or taking products from storage. So if they have you marked down when you took certain items, I know that might get bothersome, laborious, because you got things to do. You're probably very busy going in and out of the storage. But again, at the end of the day, it helps everybody to be more accurate. And if we're more accurate, our food costs and our food cost percentage are very accurate. So correct storage, the way we store stuff, is really the first step to protecting inventory. Types of food storage, right? Refrigerated storage, stuff that comes to us that's cold, needs to be stored at 41 degrees or below. So we want to make sure our equipment is in working order, mainly the refrigerator here. Frozen storage, temperatures vary based on the product. So we have to read the product label. We have to make sure that we have specific storage areas for those specific products. So again, understand all of that. And then if you're getting into dry storage, really 50 degrees to 70 degrees is where you should store that, so there won't be any issue with the products. So inventory really is intended to generate revenue. We take bits and pieces of inventory, the chef works their magic, and out pops something that was on the menu, and then we serve it to the guests. So we want to make sure that we understand that inventory is intended to generate revenue. We also have talked about this, that loss due to theft or waste increases our costs. So we have to figure out the waste, and we have to stop the theft. If there is any wild fluctuations, we want to make sure that we're checking it out, right? So could be just a key in error, but maybe it's not. And we need to address where something came from or why that expense is out of whack. Already talked about this. Counting inventory, use the two people, one to count and the other to verify, ensure accurate and honest counting, hold each other accountable, and then investigate significant inventory value changes when you compare it to, the theoretical inventory. So make sure that those two are really close to matching. How can we prevent some inventory shrinkage? Now, not everybody does this because there's a certain trust factor, but if stuff starts disappearing and nobody has a good explanation, this might have to be put in play. So store items in safe, lockable rooms or cabinets. Limit the access to authorized persons only, but that gets tough too when servers are responsible for certain things, can't lock them out of the area where their stuff is. Otherwise, you could create log jams, delays, and when things are busy, you just can't have those log jams. We might need to increase inventory frequency for some items and not for others, right? So we don't want to run out of stuff and we don't want to over order. So again, increase that inventory frequency because we're using it more and more. Maybe 3 years ago, we only ordered this many tomatoes, but now we're ordering double because of the dishes that we have on the menu. This I've never seen done, never worked at any place that does this, but you could implement an employee package inspection and also have legal counsel present, again, to send a message. I'm not sure that's the right thing to do, but if things are serious and you're missing things are disappearing, maybe it's time to inspect employee packages. But again, consult an attorney. We know there's certain costs of high cost items, and so we want to make sure that we restrict those access to managers or supervisors. They have the key. We want to prevent removal by a supplier representative or guest, right? They shouldn't be back in our storage place. We take care of that. They may want to, as part of their customer service, is put their inventory in our coolers or in our storage areas. And I say, you know what, that's a great sentiment, but we have to check this in properly and we have to put it away to make sure that we're not, that we didn't get less than we ordered or that we didn't get more than we ordered. We got just the right amount. So that being said, we want to monitor and review security procedures regularly. We will have waste. The longer we're in this business, we will have waste, but we are asking anyone that's in charge to track mistakes during preparation. Maybe there's a different way to do it. Maybe we're not using all the edible parts. So again, make sure that you're tracking your mistakes during the prep. You want to analyze and measure discarded food because that's going to be something that's going to affect the food costs. Certainly want to reduce waste to control inventory shrinkage. So along those lines, as we get into, when we prepare and is there waste? So let's take a situation to where we're cutting up lettuce for taco night. Okay, so what's better, cutting up heads of iceberg lettuce manually or buying bags of pre-cut shredded lettuce for your taco dishes? Well, let's see what that sample says. So for each head of lettuce, it takes about 2 to 5 minutes to get that shredded. It takes from a quarter to a half ounce of lettuce per taco. At $1.84 per head of lettuce, we know that they yield 20 to 30 ounces per head. We pay our workers $16 an hour, and we've got 13 heads of lettuce. For our grand total, preparing 13 heads of lettuce into shredded lettuce is going to cost us almost $36, $35.92. If we just bought a bag of shredded lettuce, here's what we get. Sure, it's a little higher, really to the point of $2.07, but that's a full bag, 20 pounds, right? It is almost the same, but there are some differences. One, if we're prepping the heads of lettuce, it's fresher, right? So it could be fresher. If we buy 20 pound bags of shredded lettuce and don't use the whole thing, then that could be spoilage. We can choose not to cut up all 13 heads. Maybe we only cut up heads of lettuce as we use them. So there's different aspects to this. Just want to give you an example of what's the trade-off if we prepare something or if we just buy it off the shelf at a place that supplies those. Portion control is always important, right? We want to make sure you understand the importance of standardized portion sizes, and it helps to manage food costs and customer satisfaction. And then overportioning increases costs, underportioning risks customer dissatisfaction, because they're going to know if they always order this dish from you and you shrink or you have planned to make smaller portions, they're going to call you out on it. So be careful with that strategy. And then key ingredients, especially the proteins, have significant cost impact. So make sure that we're aware of that. And then systems to track food usage in both the kitchen and front of the house. As I've said, your point of sale systems usually take track of this, but you may have some manual operations still in play here. Some of the portion control devices, scoops, measuring cups, scales are among some of the few. And then you could pre-portion stuff, like let's say get all the salads ready ahead of time as opposed to making them on the fly. This could help the cost control, the consistency, and the speed for sure, right? But you want to make sure that you're considering other costs because you have container and labor costs when pre-portioning. Somebody has to do all that stuff. Now we're going to take a little bit of a turn into the forecast area, okay? The forecast area really is what you'll learn here is to identify the methods used to control labor costs. So we have a thing called master schedule, and that's where we really start to strategize about when somebody comes in as a staffer, a cook, a bus, a bus person, or a host or hostess. Again, we have all of these down on the master schedule and who's actually on site or should be on site. So the importance of these sales forecasts is really important because we got to know how many people typically show up during a certain period in the day. And then we have to staff the restaurant, staff the organization appropriately. It's critical for developing a good master schedule so we know all these things. So we're going to use some help. We can have previous sales records to provide a baseline, and then things can be adjusted by the current trends. If we know the number of guests that are coming, we can probably estimate how much labor we're going to spend on those number of guests. So how do we know how many number of guests are coming? Well, we know this because we have some data, right? We can go to this same week last year, or we can just go from last week if it's a normal week, that it's and then come up with what our best estimate is on our guest counts, right? So we know if there's increased guest counts, there's going to be more employees. We might have to bring another on site, or we have to stretch out the ones we have to work longer hours. Certainly decreased guest counts, we're not going to have as much staff there. They're going to be fewer employee hours, and that's appropriate because, again, if they're there working, they're going to cost you more money, and they're probably going to be standing around and bored anyway. Some of the factors that kind of influence guest counts, holidays, right? High business on Mother's Day versus low business or closure on Christmas Day. So again, you know this, but are some of the other holidays something you should take a look at? Is 4th of July a very popular holiday for restaurants? There could be seasonal adjustments, right? Weather, extreme heat or hot or cold, reduce sales, believe it or not. They're not going to trek out in the heat or the cold just to come to your restaurant. Some events, we don't have hurricanes up here, but snowstorms for sure. Holiday shopping seasons will increase the number of foot traffic around your store. So that's always great. And then any kind of community events such as fairs, festivals, sporting events, and local activities that can impact guest counts. So all the things that can affect guest counts, right? Economic growth, right? We've seen our economy take off. So again, you're going to get increased business because of our economic growth. But certainly during tough times, economic pullback, inflationary, your fine dining declines and your casual dining rises. We're going to go more to fast food places, a little bit less expensive. If a competitor is running a well-run or well-planned promotion, that too can eat into our foot traffic. So we want to be somewhat cautious there and take those things into consideration. Your effective forecasting techniques, we need to consider more than just the numbers from the past sales, right? Is there current or local trends, such as a new business that's popped up, such as a restaurant, or there's road construction that goes right across our parking lot. So we want to make sure that we're taking these things into consideration. Is there any national or international events, economy, or even unemployment? Using that master schedule development, right? Align guest count estimates with your labor budget. You only have so much money to work with. You're going to know what that budget is for that specific time period. And then how do you staff accordingly? Again, don't have to do this off the cuff or off the seat of your pants. Really, we have software and tools to be able to help you with that, but we need to understand hours employees can work within the budget and the mix of who's going to come in. Cross-training helps. Employees filling multiple roles during slow periods or can do multiple things during one shift. So again, cross-training is important. It really starts to slow you down and increase your costs when you have employees that can only do the one thing. So think about those types of things. So an example of that would be dishwashers trained for food prep during slow shifts. So again, something to think about. Final thoughts on the forecasting and scheduling. Master scheduling involves accurate forecasts, right? Guest counts, adapting to trends and events, using your skills as a labor manager to be as efficient as possible is key. And then evaluate and refine your processes as time goes on. You'll become really good at it going forward. To control labor costs, your labor cost analysis should include compared schedule versus actual labor hours to see how close you got to your budget, or maybe you went over. Analyze any differences and their causes. Could be just an error, but maybe somebody did something. So some examples of that would be equipment issues that came in and now you had to do some things manually that you didn't expect, or unexpected tasks causing extra hours. And then certainly want to make sure that you're doing some review of your labor percentage. Evaluate how labor costs relate to sales. Did it increase? Did it decrease? Did it stay within the given percentage that your upper management's looking for? Changing gears here, we're going to get into cash management, and that is overall collecting of money. So identify whether cash drawer is over or under at the end of the day. That is just straightforward the way things are done. We want to make sure that we reconcile every day to make sure that there's not a huge discrepancy. We want to understand how to figure net cash receipts, and then identify the basic control standards to safeguard cash and credit card information. Understand how to calculate the amount of cash deposit at the end. So calculating gross sales and net cash receipt, really gross sales is really the total sales transaction for a specific period. Maybe it's just for the day, but maybe it's also for the week or these last 2 days. Whatever it is, we want to make sure that we understand what gross sales are, and then we want to subtract out of that any promotional discounts, coupons, comps, voids, tips, and paid outs, right? So we want to make sure we get accurate numbers there. The net cash receipt is determined after the register counts are compared to sales report figures. So When differences or variances start to come into play, it's really the variance of your cash is the difference between the sales report, the point of sale system says we should have, and the actual cash count. Love to have it at the end of the night that it all equals up, but invariably it doesn't. So we have to investigate why. If it's a big difference, it's even more important. So make sure that we stay on top of it. If we're over, more money than reported. If we're under, less money than reported, right? So we certainly have to record these, like this is how much we were over on Tuesday. This is how much we were over on Monday, or under. We just want to make sure we record those. Why? Because we want to identify patterns or overages or shortages. Excuse me, let me say that again. Identify patterns of overages or shortages, and then frequent issues may indicate there's some dishonesty or carelessness. Either way, we need to take care of it. So it gives us a heads up that these things might be happening. If there is thought of there could be theft, we need to put some control measures in. Maybe only managers access the register readings. Perform surprise cash accounts, maybe to make sure that people know that we're paying attention. Use checkout sheets for manual operations. Some of those common schemes out there are building the till, which you may hear of, and then overcharging guests and then pocketing the excess. So just be sure that we're looking at things positively. So for voids, overrings, and fraud prevention, some of the key practices here, only managers authorize voids. That way we can control it a little bit better. You want to monitor your point of sale reports for unusual patterns. And then some of the indicators, high voids or overrings by a single employee could signal that something that's inappropriate is going on, or frequent discrepancies signal need for observation so that employees knows that you're watching. Many times thefts happen because employees feel that nobody's watching. So again, good practice to get into. And then there's the payment card industry, the PCI compliance that we have to have, and that's revolved around credit cards. We know that we need to be very security conscious here. We want to make sure that we protect the cardholder data, that we ensure secure storage and handling to prevent fraud, avoid storing sensitive data. You know, we really want to use these devices now that take the tap or the slide, that we're not dealing with having to write down and input numbers, and then use PCI compliant systems for processing. Most of those systems out there are PCI compliant, but make sure it is, and then monitor for tip alterations and double charges. Once we have that revenue, or we've collected the revenue, what's the best way to secure it, right? So the 4 steps in revenue security, we'll talk about that. So first and foremost, what is revenue security? It's really a 4-step process to track revenue movement. Verifying the product sale, verifying the guest charges, verifying the payments that we get, and then verifying the bank product deposits. Really, it's to uncover discrepancies early and correct them before proceeding. Because if we don't, then if things continue to be off, we've went far away from the actual incident that happened. So make sure that we're uncovering any differences or discrepancies early in the process. Part 1. The key equation really is this, and that is product sales has to equal guest charges, and those guest charges has to equal the payments that are received, and those actually have to equal the sales deposits. So we should have some sort of mechanism for each step here, and they should all equal each other. The goal, ensure the generated sales, the beginning, the product sales, equal the actual bank deposits. If it doesn't, consistently something's wrong, and we really need to investigate what it is. Verifying the product sales, right? Revenue tracking, inventory and purchase. That's part of what we've already went through in this session. And the components of that are matching kitchen issues with guest checks, making sure that whatever we've ordered makes it out to the guests, and then duplicate guest check system or your point of system control system. And then if you have to duplicate things through manually, you might have to go to manually written records. And then use your point of sale control. Technology ensures billing and payment as long as it goes through. So you can use the duplicate guest check system if and there's still some entities that use that. It's really the written records of purchases and charges. But most of the establishments now have your point of sale control systems where technology replaces manual checks, ensures what leaves the kitchen is billed and paid for. The trend is point of sale systems are rapidly replacing manual systems, and that is true. Verifying the guest charges, right? The process here is that match the guest checks with the actual guest charges. Review server or shift reports, right? So we want to make sure that everything's done accurately, identifies any discrepancies and responsible, that those that are the responsible server and what shift they're on. So again, if something's not right, you have records to show who potentially rang it in and what part of the discrepancy belongs to who. And then that cash report filled by the cashier during the shift and summarizes all the money, the checks, and all the charge slips that are collected. Your daily sales report really summarizes the sales, cash, and charges collected. So it's easy to follow the paper trail here and identify any overages or shortages. And then certainly we want to make sure that we're accurate on all this because the bookkeeper or the manager, they use cash reports, their register readings, and those types of things. Moving on to revenue security part 2. Again, that 4-step system, we've already done 2 of those, right? So here's that equation again. Our product sales all the way through has to equal our deposits. And then steps 1 and 2, we've already talked about verifying product and sales and guest charges. We'll spend some time on 3 and 4, verifying payments and deposits. So verifying payments, right? Verifying payments is as critical as the sales transaction. Ensure the correct payment handling and secure storage of cash, discount coupons, and credit card slips, right? That we have that available. Cash handling, right? Count cash at the start and the end of each shift, right? We got to know what's in the register. Most of our point of sale systems know that, but physically knowing what it is paramount as well. Limit the voiding of register overrings to managers, right? So again, that will take any person as a server out of the way here, and that's probably the proper way to handle it. Generate a receipt for every transaction provided to the guests. I'm hoping that we're doing that. And then secure undeposited cash in a safe daily so that there's no enticement, that people won't get the urge to maybe pocket some of that stuff. Again, that it has happened. We want to make sure that people know that we're watching it. Put your undeposited cash away in a safe somewhere in the facility. Some of the common practices: use a for deposit only stamp on all checks once you receive it. Verify daily deposits through bank statements to make sure the bank has those and that they were deposited properly. And then if, maybe gone are the days of having staffers take money to the bank, you might consider a service or secure cash handling as opposed to relying on one person going forward. Also, require a merchant account for your credit cards, a bank account, a payment processor, something that can handle the credit cards, and then make sure that you're processing transactions, right? So again, sometimes people don't transact right away; they wait. So again, make sure that it's pretty close to the time that you've accepted the charges. Again, I've had charges show up 3 and 4 days later. It's just odd. So try to make sure that these are done within 1 to 5 days. And then account for associated fees such as the setup fees, monthly fees, transaction fees, those types of things. That will reduce your profit and increase your costs. But they're prevalent, so you need to make sure you're knowing what they are. Handling your coupons and gift certificates, right? Treat coupons just like cash or credit cards because they are. And then mark coupons void after use and staple them to the order ticket so they can't be reused. Use distinct design for gift certificates, right? So they know that they're yours and they're not counterfeited. And then set up a gift certificate log. So when we issue our gift certificates, we can also log in when they're used. Again, so to prevent people from trying to use copies. If you use any type of comps or discounts, employee meals, guest relations, marketing and promotions and public safety or military discounts, make sure that we're taking that into consideration. Record those comps even if no money is exchanged, because again, it has to appear in our records. And then choose between net sales and gross sales methods for P&L reporting. Just be consistent. If you choose one of those, either net sales or gross sales, you're going to be okay. But make sure you're consistently using one and not both. And then verification of your deposits. Managers should make daily deposits, right? You don't want a pile of cash building up to where it entices those that are around it. Match those bank deposits with the actual sales receipts. This is that formula that we had. And establish policies for reconciliation and hire an auditor annually, right? So they can check and make sure that everything's on the up and up. Your credit card sales verification, right? We want to match credit card slips with guest checks, that what was charged was what was sent over in your credit card charge is what we charged the guest. This is where some of those discrepancies that can happen. If we don't do that, maybe somebody punched in that it was a higher amount than what was on the gift charge, and they are pocketing the difference. So again, make sure that it matches. Verify that your actual credit card transmission went through, okay? Don't get in a hurry. Make sure that you've seen that it went through and that you get some type of a readout or printout. And then again, fees reduce the actual deposit amount, right? So we're not going to match totally if we're using the credit, because they take the fee out of that going forward. So you have to be somewhat careful there, making sure that you certainly account for the fees, so that when you try to match it up to the sales receipt at the end, sales report at the end of the day, that it does match. Well, you've made it. You've made it to the end of session 2 of the Hospitality Training Institute of Michigan's Restaurant Financials 101. So thank you for coming, hanging in there. There's a lot of information today and a lot of information over the last 2 sessions. We certainly appreciate your time. If you have any questions, please reach out to the Hospitality Training Institute of Michigan. Thank you, and have a good rest of the day wherever you are.